Hello, can everybody hear me? Thank you very much. I hope you've all had a nice lunch and do feel if you want to have a little snooze through this part, I will not be offended whatsoever. But thank you for this opportunity. Here we go. Here's me. So I'm delighted to be here speaking to you all today, and I'm really, really honoured to be part of the Rare Dementia support team. It's a fantastic team. We're still formulating my role a bit at the moment. There's lots of avenues to explore, so we're sort of slowly getting there. It's nice to see so many of you here that I've been emailing or speaking to on the telephone, so now I can put sort of faces to names, which is really nice. So me here today is really an opportunity to let you all know a bit about my background and experience and how that fits in with Rare Dementia support. It's a little bit different to the research background that most of my colleagues have within the team, but hopefully it will be some benefit to you all. So a little bit of background for context. So here's me and my family. So as well as working at Rare Dementia Support, I'm a wife and a mum and an owner of a crazy dog there, which basically means I cook lots of food, do mountain loads of washing and run around Streatham Common after my lovely dog here. I've spoke to many of you on the phone about dogs because we've got lots of dog owners here, and it is sort of popular belief that having a dog is beneficial for your physical and mental health, and I totally endorse that. And my top tip today would be get out with your dog. If you haven't got a dog, go to borrowmydoggy.com website and get a little pooch to go out to walk with, go back home, have a cuddle and fall asleep on the sofa. Perfect. And you don't have any communication problems with dogs either. So a little bit about my academic history. I've got a Bachelor of Science in Sociology and Public Health, which I gained over many years through different disciplines, the University of Abertay in Scotland and the Open University. As I said, it took many years. Lots of things were getting in the way, children, unwell parents, things like that. And at the graduation ceremony, the dean was very polite that she was so impressed that I was the only one there. It took 20 years to get my degree, 2 dogs, 2 children, 6 house moves, but in the end of it, I became qualified. So. But I just thought that this really does add up for some extra experience in there. So after graduating, I did some further studies in public health because I actually found that I really did enjoy studying after that amount of time. What I really enjoy is looking at public services that are out there, improving public services, but really listening to you people that are really important in shaping the future of services and what is provided out there. I worked for the Alzheimer's Society for the past 7 years. I finished last year, and I did a variety of roles there. The last role I did was really, really special to me because it meant that I was fully embedded in cognitive neurology. I was really lucky to work with the clinical team at the National Hospital for Neurology and Neurosurgery and St George's Hospital, and I really learnt so much, not only from the staff that I worked with, but for patients and carers. This really added to, the benefit of my experience. I've added in here as well my personal experience because my father developed Alzheimer's disease when he was 62. So I really do understand the impact that a neurological disorder can actually have on a family. So hoping some personal experience, some academic experience and some actual work experience will be benefit to my new role. So I don't want to dwell on my personal experience, but I do feel that learning from his experience is vital for helping each other. And I feel today that you've had great times in your groups helping each other. I'm sure that everybody will agree that listening to other people, you'll feel less isolated, and listening to their experience will be of benefit to you. So my personal experience, I was living in Scotland with my young family, and my parents were living in Gloucestershire in the southwest of England when the first signs appeared. My dad had decided to retire, and we put these symptoms down to he'd been working very hard all his life and he was just a bit restless and didn't know what to do with himself when he retired. But in fact, he retired because he could no longer do his job to the very high standard that he was used to, but he didn't want to admit that. But it took us a long time to persuade him to go to the GP. And actually, it's never really a good idea to have a GP who's a really good family friend, because our GP didn't want to upset my dad. He didn't want to diagnose him or say what was wrong or disclose any information, because he was my dad's friend and that was where he thought that his duty lay. So after a while, my brother decided to go with my dad to the doctors, and the doctor just said to my brother, "Oh, we've got to take this really slow. We can't upset your dad, let's take this slow." So it took us a long time to actually get him to get a referral to the memory service. And when we did, they delighted my dad by telling him how young and fit he was. So he left thinking there was absolutely nothing wrong with him whatsoever. But after months of scans and tests and more tests, he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease at age 62. No support was offered to us as a family, or really any information was given to us. The only information is that he had a slow heart rate, so he wasn't suitable for the medication which was available. And this was before NICE guidelines changed, so there wasn't an alternative. We were, however, told that if we wanted the alternative medication, we could pay for it. As far as I'm concerned, we were still living in the UK where we had an NHS system. We weren't living in America. And so I was really very reluctant to pay for medication, which I saw as our right. So one thing I did do after battling with this is I spoke to my local MP, and he fought the case for us, which therefore we ended up getting the medication on the NHS. I would advise people to use their MP for cases like this, for any issues that they're having with, getting what are their rights, because your MP is there to support you, and he was very, very supportive in this case. So time went by, and we were beginning to notice popping up every now and again. I don't want this to sound a depressing story, my personal story, because my dad lived for 13 years with Alzheimer's, and a lot of those years were very full and extremely happy for us all. We had the odd hiccup now and again, but, a lot of the time we had some happy times. We did find a struggle, though, finding age-appropriate services for my dad, because he was young and fit, and he wanted to do more than sit in a chair or sing songs. Unlike many of you, he didn't have any language problems. His language was rather colourful a lot of the time. I think this was frustration. His language was affected later. But the big part that we had was the frustration with his needs being unmet, basically. So after totting things up and looking back on things, hindsight's a great thing, but we did realise that he might have been a bit of a handful, because he was banned from 4 day centres and 3 care homes, and we really did struggle finding somewhere that could meet his needs. At the end of the day, he did spend 3 years in a fantastic care home who were amazing, and he lived very happily there. But over those 13 years, there was a lot of experience to learn. I learned a lot about GPs, a lot about memory services, a lot about community mental health teams, and a lot about social services. And there were constant barriers all the way. And I really ended up having to question everything that we were going through. That has given me great experience of questioning things. And I think probably now in my job, I question far too many things. I just think, oh God, she's asking another question. But I really would say to people, when you get your first knockback, when you're applying for things, do question it and go again, because quite often things are accepted on the appeal. And if you don't ask the questions, sometimes you don't get the answers. I've put this picture up here of my dad, age 20, because he was what was called slightly challenging in those care homes and day centres he was banned from. I would often use this photo to go with him, because we did actually get a different reaction when we put this photo up rather than this challenging elderly man who was being a complete pain in the backside to them. And they did react different to it. So in 2011, I moved with my family down to London from Scotland, and I approached the Alzheimer's Society to volunteer for them. Fortunately, they were really short-staffed, had staff going on sabbaticals, so they actually offered me a paid job, much to my husband's surprise. And I started working for them as a dementia advisor in Southwark Memory Service in South London. So this service consisted of a psychiatrist, psychologist, some nurses, and then the support from the dementia support workers and advisors. At this point, there was lots of local authority cuts, so there was a lot of inadequate provision out there, not suitable to fit a lot of people's needs. So the least I could do was help navigate people through, using my experience, through the health and social care system. It's a bit of a maze out there, and people really do need this help there. From that job, I moved to Wandsworth, where they were just reconfiguring the services with a new dementia pathway. At that point, Wandsworth was set into 2 different areas, and they were just joining it together. So it was a bit like joining Berlin when it came together after the German reunification. Nobody was really friends with each other. It was quite difficult to actually fit in some work with them. But after a few years working with the Memory Assessment Service, I wanted to make a few changes. I wanted to get more involved with service design. I felt that I'd spent a long time getting information for people, from patients and for carers, about all the things that were going wrong, and I wanted to put that into action and see what services we could actually devise which would be helpful for people. So I took the role of service manager in the London Borough of Sutton, which for those of you outside London, is a very leafy borough with green parks and things in South London. It had a huge potential for partnership work in there. The Alzheimer's Society had lots of services there, but they were all working very solo, and it wasn't very community-based. We had a fantastic health and social care commissioner who was very, very passionate about dementia. And we had a really active local mayor as well. And this was perfect for setting up new services. And one of the things we did set up was the Dementia Action Alliance there, which were all organisations, health and social care, charities, voluntary sector, cinemas, gyms, other entertainment provision, all came together and decided to make their services much more dementia friendly, and it had an amazing effect on the borough. We saw dementia cafes dropping off in libraries, cinemas were doing dementia friendly screenings, gyms were doing special programs for people, Age UK had services all over the place. It really, really made a difference in the whole community. I was also involved there in the NHS Vanguard project, which gave money to improve services in care homes there. Sutton's a bit of a funny place. It has lots of really good grammar schools and lots of care homes. It's a really diverse community there, but it has about 65 care homes in one borough. And the media, you will see all the time lots of complaints about care homes, and they really wanted to change that experience for people. So we worked sort of from the bottom up with the care staff, listening to the care staff, the key workers who knew their residents the best, to see how we can improve things. And it was a great project, seeing everybody come together to work on this. It made a real different atmosphere in care homes. Care home staff were staying in their jobs for longer. They felt more empowered. Residents were happier, and ultimately people were going into hospital a lot less. So it really made a difference. And at the end of that experience, it was really nice to be involved in that project to show that care homes were actually a really good option and a pleasant place for people to end their days, rather than the workhouse model that we often see in the media. So my last project for the Alzheimer's Society was the London Neurology Project, and this idea came about after meeting with Professor Nick Fox and Dr. Catherine Mummery at Queen Square and Dr. Jeremy Isaacs at St George's. both hospitals wanted us involved, but they wanted very different things. And the project that they wanted us to do was very different to what the Alzheimer's Society normally do. So I really had to go back to the society and fight for the money to allow them to do this pilot project. They initially funded it for a year, but I managed to squeeze 3 years out of it, so I was quite pleased at that one. Excuse me a second. So at Queen Square, I supplied personalised post-diagnostic support for all types of dementia. And this was people all over the country and beyond. We had people coming from Gibraltar, all over the place that came to the service here, to the clinics. And I was there to provide immediate support. So people didn't leave the clinic without any information or some support set up for them. At St George's, they had less staff there, so we did sort of a lot of wraparound support. So I was involved in contacting people before they came to their appointment, reassuring them what the process would be, sitting in on their assessments, and actually being there at the end if there was a diagnosis to give post-diagnostic support, or if people didn't have a diagnosis, it was their reassurance and, you know, off they went. That time, over the 3 years, I was sitting in clinic rooms a lot with the consultants, looking at brain scans, going through all the assessments. I got quite good at the MMSC scoring myself. I can remember what the day of the week it was. It really, really gave me some invaluable learning experience. And I've got a little pie chart here. So this was the data we collected from this. And these are all the different types of dementia. Quite often when you're working with memory services, you will find people have Alzheimer's disease or vascular dementia. When you're in neurology, you have so many different sorts of dementia that people are coming in, getting it diagnosed with. And I think so when I totted it up at the end of the year, I think there was about 18 different types of dementia. So it does still make me very angry when somebody's gone to the doctors or has been properly assessed and they are told that they just have dementia, because it comes in very many shapes and forms. We also collected a lot of demographic information from people, where they lived, what support options were available in those areas, and we got a lot of evaluation from people and from patients and their carers, and a lot of these were young people. The main issues were that we needed some separate services for people that were still working. We needed support for families which still had dependent children. And actually, we really needed some empowerment for those people that have just been diagnosed as well. I was really fortunate to have a trusted colleague at the Alzheimer's Society who was really helpful in giving people with dementia a voice. And she created some roles so people that wanted to speak about their dementia and wanted to make some changes had that platform to do that. And I accompanied one such lady who's here today, actually, I'm very proud to say. And she came to City Hall and she addressed the Mayor and the Assembly. And she talked about the issues that faced somebody that's got dementia at a young age. She was really nervous at the time, but she felt really, really empowered afterwards. And it was such a boost to her. And everybody congratulated her afterwards for being really inspirational. I think these parts of my job are really, really important. I also took another couple of people to do some teaching for the paramedic students at St George's Hospital. And this was a real surprise for me because it was a Friday afternoon and 140 students turned up on a Friday afternoon to hear these people speak. And they listened. It was difficult having this teaching format because both the people I took had problems with their speech. So to get them to stand up and speak like me wasn't an option. So we sort of sat down on a sofa and we had a bit of a Jonathan Ross, Graham Norton sort of interview sort of moment. And with some prompts, they got some really, really valuable information out. The students gave them a standing ovation, and they said that it was possibly the most important part of their training through dementia. And actually, never again would they ever presume, when they're out on the road in their ambulances, that a middle-aged man who's having trouble with his words is not the result of an afternoon of irresponsible drinking. So I hold a monthly young onset support group at St George's, which enables people to use their voice like this and to get peer support, which helps them feel less isolated and learn some strategies and very empowered. So here I am now in my new role, and it's all a little bit different for me, but I think it's really important for me to learn those skills that I learned in the community and bring these into the groups and see how we can take this forward. I've spent a lot of time in my working life building relationships and networking and learning, and I really want to have everybody that works in our groups have a realistic view of what happens out there in the community. And those things tend to be, which I heard so many times on the table today, no one knows what PPA is. GP doesn't often know what to do. And social services, well, they've not heard of such a thing, and actually there's not a tick box on their assessment form, so they don't really quite know what to do. So what I want to do, and with the development of the work that I'm planning on doing, is take a look at this concept of support. It's a very ambiguous term, and I really want to explore it and find out what that means to all of us and to all of you here, so how we can develop our services going forward. So most of you here have come to us through our website at Rare Dementia Support. It's very easy to sign up as a member, and we collect these every week. I've now started introducing an initial telephone call, so if people sign up, I will send them an email with some information, but then offer to have a phone call with them, just to see what the situation they are in and learn a bit more about them to see how we can help them as best as possible. I'd rather do that than just emailing you lots and lots of information that you're not going to read and is not going to be of benefit to you. But if I can have more of an understanding of what everybody's situation is, then hopefully we can help you a bit better. We also get lots of inquiries from professionals as well, from professionals all over the world. My favourite one of recent is by a psychiatrist in Mexico who's wanting to set up some support groups. So I may plan to go over there to help him with that, because I think that's a perfect opportunity. But these professionals, they don't actually normally tell us that they're professionals, which we have got a box, and I really wish they would, because ultimately, we want the professionals to help you. So if we can help and equip and empower the professionals, it's going to be of benefit to you, and no longer that you'll come to us and say, nobody understands, the GP doesn't know what to do. But we've got a long way to go with that, but that is on the list. So these are the few frequently asked questions that I get emailed about. So my husband or my wife has just had a diagnosis of PPA. I don't really understand what it means, because they've just come out of the clinic and that's what they've been told, and they've not been given any information. Really, I like to have a conversation with people at that point, so we can discuss what they have been told, whereabouts they are, what the symptoms are, a bit about the social environment that they're living in, and then we can send some information tailored out for that. We've got a fantastic fact sheet which Jason and Chris devised, which is really, really informative, and I do send it out to people all the time and tell them to take copies of this to give to all the health and social care people that they come across, because when you say to them it's PPA and they look at you blank, you can actually educate them. This is something really valuable. The GP doesn't know. Well, we've heard that again lots of times today, and it is a rare condition, and GPs often tell me that they deal with coughs and colds. However, there's a lot of you in the room here today, and there's a lot more people out there. So, we do need to raise more awareness, and, we are looking at some professional resources to equip the GPs with. Also get asked what help is needed, and really that is dependent on the person. We're each all individuals. We have different family environments, different social setups. We've got a guide, a generic guide of, what help is available. But again, it is that individualised, personalised care that we would like to be able to produce, which will help you as much as possible. And finally, I can't do any more. That's often what I hear from patients. And unfortunately, that's part of the disease, that, you can no longer do some of the things that you used to be able to do. We can tweak things and make small adaptations, put things into place to help people do things. Sometimes we've got to just realise that I can no longer do that. But I think it's really important to realise for that one thing that you can't do, there's two things you can do, and try and put a positive spin on it. Sorry. So going forward, I'll be looking at how we develop the different strands of our membership. They all come in together, so we don't know who's what at the moment. So I really want to identify who's the patients, who's the carers, who's the professionals, who are the people that live in Mexico, in Canada, and different parts of America that email me, and see how we can help them as much as possible. I want to define what is holistic support. I'm sure my colleagues are sick to death of hearing me use the word holistic these days, because I use it in most sentences. But I really do want to make sure our support is not just information-based, but is really wrap-round support and what we can do to benefit people's individual needs as much as possible. We want to go down that professional route and start having a look at who are the professionals that we're dealing with. Not that just we're dealing with, that have come to us, the professionals that you deal with. Who do you come into contact that keep saying to you, I don't know what PPA is, and you really wish they did know what PPA is. So we really want to get some really good resources out there for professionals and for them to spread the word within their professional teams as well. We want to take your feedback to see how we go forward with the service development, and we really want to empower you as members, and whether that's as a patient to make the most of your lives, or as a carer to do what you can to, and hopefully that we can make you feel supported. So your feedback is absolutely crucial for our development. So thank you for listening to me, later on after lunch. Now my job is here to listen to you and to try and answer your questions. I'm available by email, by telephone, but I have been brought in to help support you, so please do get in contact with me. Does anyone have any questions? Hello. I think Chris has got a mic.
Thank you very much, Nikki, for that talk. I was really encouraged by the facts that you did quite creative things in your old job. You did very creative things in your last job about involving the people who know the condition, and that's quite reassuring. You don't plan to do that here?
Yes. There's only one of me. I appreciate that. However, we've got team, and it's no good me having my skills myself. My skills will be shared with the team as they share their skills with me. Yeah. Okay.
Second question I had was, you said your role is evolving. I know you shed some light on that, particularly the word holistic. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, at the moment, a lot of our support is information-based. And we want to not just look at you as a carer of somebody with PPA. We want to have a look at you as that person and what sort of things will actually benefit you. So you live well, you can do your caring role well, and what sort of is a bit of a signposting and putting you into touch with different organisations. But I suppose we're looking at what will make you as a carer live well and your partner to live well with his condition.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions?
I'd like to know more about which direction treatments are going in, about the testing of drugs, medications, attitudes towards the illness. I read quite a bit of American stuff, but I don't see much UK stuff. Maybe I'm not looking in the right place, but there's a lot of stuff coming from America. I think I've talked to Chris about inflammation and the treatment of inflammation, which is possibly the root cause of some of the reactions of the body, about things like diabetes and insulin, and whether there was talk at one time about those sort of, that's things I'd like to know about, really.
Well,
helping and trying to deal with this awful illness.
I'm going to pass you over to Jason for that answer. But I think what I could say on my behalf, if people are wanting those sort of things, and I suppose it's, coming to me to see if I can gather that information, but I will get Jason to answer that question for you.
Thank you.
I don't want to steal Nikki's thunder, but I mean, the question is, that question that you've asked is a good question, but we don't know the answers, really. I mean, there's a lot of interest in what are the kind of risk factors for getting PPA. I mean, and there aren't any very major ones. It's not like there's one that's come out that, if you've got diabetes, you suddenly have a tenfold increase in risk or something. There's nothing like that. People are doing very big epidemiological studies of the frontotemporal dementias to try and work out if there are things more generally. And of course, in Alzheimer's, in the much more common diseases, it's much easier to try and look at that sort of question. But the one thing that I would say, just purely from a clinical perspective, is that the people that get PPA, and probably some types more than others, and we now know that the non-fluent type tends to be more common in older people. They will have other things like diabetes and blood pressure, and the usual things that happen to people as they get older. So certainly in terms of overall quality of life, and also just in terms of basically looking after their health needs, it's very important that we don't overlook those things, because what tends to happen is that if you get a diagnosis of PPA, it tends to, or a rare dementia of some kind, it tends to then attract all the attention goes into that, and people can react in medics can, I'm really talking about, can react in one of two ways. One is to kind of just assume everything that happens to the person is due to that, and stop looking for other things or worrying about things like blood pressure, or because you've got that diagnosis, that's the end of the road in terms of other types of medical investigation. So, what about if you get cataracts? What about, if you need an operation for a hernia repair or something? So a lot of what we are doing in that line, in that general area, is trying to make sure that people don't overlook those other health aspects. That's where we are at the moment.
I was thinking more really that the Americans are sort of saying that, American research is saying think that the causes of some of these PPA is inflammation of the body, and how to help with that, and how to change the balance of the body with possibly things like diet to deal with the inflammation, rather than trying to get rid of the amyloids which are actually protecting the brain. So I was thinking sort of from the other side, really, how to help the body not to get any worse, ways of treating oneself to not, or with medications, to stop the body progressing down this awful path of permanent damage to the brain.
Yeah, so that is the interest, is to find the cause that we can then reverse. But it's I mean, I can go out on a limb and say it's not going to be inflammation. I mean, we kind of know it's not going to be something simple like that. I mean, there is interest in finding new things and new approaches, but people tried treating inflammation, standard sorts of anti-inflammatory type medications 20 years ago in Alzheimer's. It doesn't work. I mean, that we need better models of the disease, and we need to make sure that we're treating the diseases that need to be treated. So if you've got arthritis, that gets the right treatment. But we're nowhere near. I mean, at the moment, it's not the case that we've identified a brain inflammation that causes PPA. It's not. I mean, there is research that claims these things from time to time, but it's not very good research.
The Americans are hugely trying to sell this to us, aren't they?
Well, I mean, people sell all
We do
sorts of
know-
things.
Yeah, we do know that this sort of selling goes on, but it's having the opportunity really to be able to discuss it with you and hear what you've got to say about that.
Yeah.
And possibly,
But-
save lots of money for us individually of following those paths.
Yeah, you should be very wary. I mean, I think people that we see in clinic, some of what we do is counselling them about those sorts of things. And, the worst excesses are things like stem cell therapy, for example. But I mean, I understand the wish to try and pursue other avenues. Absolutely understand it, because conventional medicine, like, what we regard as legitimate, is not offering very much, in terms of actually addressing the disease. I mean, we try and offer help and support and all those things, but, we're still looking for the thing that's going to actually switch off the disease, which of course is the thing that would ultimately be what we want, but we need a lot more work to be done. And it's really important, I think, that people that are, if there's a temptation to follow those paths, that you discuss it with your GP and with the doctors that you have looking after the person with PPA, because I mean, it's very important to get some perspective, because from the media, even relatively responsible medical journalists want stories. They want things that make good copy. They do not want to have a heavily nuanced headline that says, treatment discovered that perhaps in mice that perhaps in 20 years might yield a new direction of human research. That's not a good headline. They want cure for Alzheimer's disease or cure for PPA. So a lot of the disappointment, I think, the sociology of it is that people are talking about things that were initially overhyped, and then it's tremendously disappointing for everybody when it doesn't work. And I mean, the amyloid, probably many of you know, there's been a big amyloid trial recently that's failed in Alzheimer's again, and that's terribly demoralising for everybody concerned, because that was one of the things that was being held up as, it was going to be the treatment. So, I mean, amyloid is an Alzheimer type issue, really, as far as we know. But even in Alzheimer's, which is the common, probably the better understood disease, we have a long, long way to go to answering your question, I think.
Okay, thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris, just in the front here. Anne in the middle. Anne in the middle. Oh, there we go.
On the other side of that, it was really irritating a week ago, I think it was, or 2 weeks ago, on Radio 4, when they were saying that there's going to be fewer people having dementia now, particularly in the States, funnily enough, because people now know that they've got how they should eat, and all those sort of things. And I was in the house on my own shouting my head off because I've got dementia. Saying, I've just been out for a run. I know what I'm doing. I can't stop myself having this illness because of that. And, it made me mad that people might be thinking that I've got this because I did something wrong.
Yeah. No, it's...
And people on Radio 4 and somebody from the Alzheimer's Saturday actually saying, yes, that's really...
They really should know
it's
better,
really
yes.
important.
It's
And
not
I
a good message.
They probably only had that poor girl to have, say 2 minutes, so I know she probably wanted to say more. But it's that sort of madness of really...
It's
just
infuriating,
Yeah.
same as the message I've seen on a paper before that chocolate is going to cure dementia.
Oh, great. All right with that.
So we're all sorted out there, aren't we? Yes. But yeah, unfortunately, what we read in the press has to be taken with a large bucket of salt, yes.
I asked the Alzheimer's Society to actually go back to them and say, that's not okay.
No, it certainly is not okay. Any more questions before we finish?
Is there any evidence that PPA might be familial in any way, however remote?
Again, I'll hand that over to the clinical expert.
Yeah, I mean, but I understand the wish to ask the question. So, one of the groups we were talking about, actually, I don't know which group you were in, but before lunch came up, and it's a complicated answer. I mean, the overall message is that PPA is only rarely familial. Okay, so anybody, which I don't recommend this, but anybody that Googles FTD or frontotemporal dementia, if you go just type that into a search engine, you quickly start to see references to genes and genetics, and this is very complicated. So the reason that that's there is because the other big sort of variety of frontotemporal dementia, and in fact it's the single most common of all the syndromes, is the one that gets led by behavioural and personality change. It's the so-called behavioural variant frontotemporal dementia. It's sometimes called just frontotemporal dementia or FTD, and then we've got an FTD support group. Hannah and others are involved with it. It's a very big issue, very big interest of ours as well. But the syndrome does matter a lot in terms of your genetic risk, because that other behavioural syndrome has a very heavy genetic component, so it's quite relatively commonly familial, and PPA is not commonly familial, so it makes a big difference what type you've got, which is one of the complexities, but it can be. So what we tend to do in our clinic is we take everybody case by case. It's holistic, try to be, which is, you can't really say usefully to somebody, well, you've got an X% risk where X is a small number. It doesn't really help you that much if you're the person, you're sitting there and you want to know if your children are the ones that are going to be at risk. So we tend to look case by case, and it depends on things like within PPA what type you've got. That's quite important. It also depends on the fine details, because sometimes this is quite a general point, but sometimes the people that are atypical, quite atypical for their syndrome, so they kind of have that diagnosis, but the doctors, neurologists along the way have said, there's things about it that don't quite fit. We are quite suspicious often that may be something to do with a gene, but that's not many people. And then if people in particular have got a family history, and by a family history I really am talking about not so much a long lost aunt had Alzheimer's disease, it's whether someone is in a family where it marches down the generations, people in their 50s, 40s, 50s, every generation is getting it. That does make us worry about a gene, but that's not very many people with PPA that are in that category. So, it's a complicated answer, I'm afraid, and it depends on the individual case, which, we obviously could discuss with you offline, but you really need to talk to the neurologist that's made the diagnosis in detail about that.
Thank you. Any more before we go?
Hello.
Hello.
So my wife was diagnosed 18 months or so ago with leukopenic, and one of the biggest pains for her was when she was diagnosed was the blood transfusion service said, we don't want your blood anymore. And Judith has always been a giver, and she's looking at donating a brain when she passes away to the Newcastle University brain collection service.
Yes.
But also, which naturally leads the question on, is there any support you as the professionals need from we as the patients, that we could happily sit in front of you or prod and poke at us and learn from our experiences and our issues?
That's a bit of...
Yeah, I think the answer is yes.
Yes, definitely.
Sorry,
That's okay.
Yeah. So one thing that I did mention, I don't think, in my Rainbow talk this morning, was that we are actually doing a big study. Well, when I say we, I mean Chris is leading a big study of the staging of the diseases, all of the syndromes, because amazingly, despite the fact that since Professors Warrington and Meslem actually rediscovered these diseases about sort of 40 years ago, we really do not yet have a good, staging system. And that what you're talking about, where we actually canvass people's, their actual verbatim accounts of what it's like to live with the illness, that's been incredibly useful. So we're partway through, collecting all that information and reducing it and getting their sort of thoughts about not just us sitting there or any doctor sitting there saying, oh, we think this is going to be mild, this is going to be moderate, this is going to be severe, but actually asking people what their experiences are. You can't do that sort of work really without that someone being put in front of you, or getting particularly caregivers, because that's they're the people who really have the perspective on the trajectory of what's been going on. So that's one very important thing. I mean, the other thing I would say again is just to plug, if people are interested in research, it's quite likely we'll certainly bend over backward to accommodate you. I mean, we do have some rules about putting people into studies, and it depends on things like, can they travel to London, for example, that sort of thing, because that's where we are. But it's not nearly the sort of work that's to be done to understand PPA of all kinds. So doing things like psychology testing and brain scanning and that sort of research, and getting people's sort of impressions, collecting their comments about the disease. And we do a lot of questionnaire-based, surveys and things. That can be done sometimes with a one-off visit. It's not like committing to being in a trial where it's often very intensive and it goes on over many visits, which of course is necessary for drug trials and things of that kind. So I would urge everybody that is thinking along those lines to be in touch with one of the members of the team to say, what can we do to help? Because that it's quite likely, I think, that we'll be able to find ways to get that you can really help, which I think, based on other conversations I've had with people over the years, can sometimes be a way that people feel that they are fighting back a bit. Because, I mean, there's not much any of us can really do to fight back at the moment, but I think that might be one thing. So I'm interested to talk.
Do you want... Oh, last question, yeah? Sure.
It's really just a sort of suggestion. With Chris's study, as people, I think one of the things that I find most difficult, I have a husband who has PPA, is making life meaningful for him and making life meaningful for me. And it's 12, 15 years, and I don't want to think, if you've got to the end of 15 years and it's all just been sitting there whilst the disease took hold. And just a suggestion to run in parallel with Chris's study, which is that actually collectively gathering all the things that make life relevant at the different stages of the disease. Because one of the things that I think that would be really helpful for everyone is to actually be able to do things together and individually to the capacity that people have at every point in their disease. And so it's just another suggestion of a parallel set of activities that can be built on the back of Chris's study, which is not medical or medical research, but it would be very meaningful for this group.
I totally agree with that. And one of the things that I have spoke with Jason and Chris about is when we are looking at the stages, is actually it's great to say at this stage this will happen, but to have a parallel of what can you do at this stage? What's most helpful at this stage? And actually, what can you do to live really well at this stage? So that would be really helpful for all of you to help me with. But yeah, that would be a great bit of collection work. And it's fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. Do you want to finish off? Do you want to close, Jason? Yeah, do you want to?
I mean, just to say, I think we're drawing things to a close, and I'd want to thank everybody again for your insightful comments and obviously for coming along. So see you at the next meeting. Okay.
Thank you so much.